Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this WWF Insider Series virtual event. My name is Cassie O'Connor, and I work with U.S. Foundation donors. In a moment, I'll introduce Alejandro Pérez, Senior Vice President, Policy and Government Affairs here at WWF. But first, let me share some logistics about today's program. We will have time for questions after the presentation. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please use the Google form below the video player in your web browser. Our team behind the scenes will monitor your submissions throughout the presentation, and we'll try to take as many questions as we can during the Q&A portion. If you'd like to maximize the size of the video screen, float your mouse over the video player and click on the expand icon at the far right of the toolbar on the bottom. To exit out of full screen mode, which you may want to do to submit a question, you can minimize your video by pressing the escape button on your keyboard. And in a final note, we are recording today's webinar so that we can share it on the WWF website. Now for today's topic. The 2020 election is behind us, and President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris have been sworn in. As candidates, they set out the most aggressive climate and environmental justice plan ever introduced by a major party nominee. As President and Vice President-elect, they made it clear that science will be at the forefront of their administration. On day one, they rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement and took a series of actions to undo some of the harmful environmental decisions made by the previous administration. This is a great start, but there's much more work to be done. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Alejandro Pérez and two members of his team, Rose Luttenberger and Anthony Tusino. Alejandro is the Senior Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs at WWF. He previously served as Special Assistant to California Attorney General Javier Becerra, and before that, he served as Deputy Assistant to the President for Legislative Affairs and House Liaison in the Obama administration. To get us started, I'm going to hand things over. Alejandro, we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Casey, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you to all of you for joining us this afternoon. So for those of us who work with the US government, we know the balance of power in the federal government adjusts every 2 years. That's because of the election of the whole House of Representatives and 1/3 of the Senate. And of course, every 4 years with the presidential election. As Casey noted, we begin 2021 with a game changer election, with a new president, a new majority in the Senate, and therefore unified democratic control of Congress and the executive branch. We're hopeful and excited that the vision of President Biden and Vice President Harris will better match WWF solutions to many of the challenges we face. Considering the significant steps the president has taken so far in terms of appointments to key positions and bold policy announcements, we are encouraged about the progress we can make with him and with his cabinet. We're equally excited to restart our work with Congress. It is true that some of our historic champions on Capitol Hill, like Chairwoman Nita Lowey and Chairman Elliot Engel, are not back for the 117th Congress. But we will get to work with our new champions, including these three chairs for these important committees for our work. On the Senate side, because of change in control of the majority, we will build on the relationships we developed with these key ranking members on important committees. Still, we strongly believe that it is critical to develop broad support whenever possible. So it will be important for us to continue to engage key Republican senators and House members as we have done in the past. Our approach to achieve our goals will be to build on the relationship we've developed, to actively engage the new players in the administration, and of course, the new class of freshman members and senators. Finally, to utilize our activists and our members, many of you, to help us get the word out about our work and the commitment to nature. So as we do this, clearly we need to acknowledge the dynamic in the country and the world. As important as our priorities are, and they are very important, everything we want to advance will be affected by the COVID pandemic. Therefore, we have to position our engagement to advance our priorities in that context. In addition, Congress and the administration will engage in discussions about government spending and the debt limit. This will be an added complication to policy ideas we would like to put forward and to the bold funding steps we believe are needed to effectively tackle the challenges we face. So let us highlight some of these key priority areas we will be working on in the next year, this year and next. I'm going to cover the top three, and then I will invite my colleagues, Rose and Anthony, to cover the last two. So on pandemic prevention, even as we must continue to tackle the ongoing pandemic, and that is critical, our task will be to keep making the case to the administration and to Congress that it's just as important to work on the prevention of future pandemics, and specifically to highlight the clear link to the risks of nature loss and our encroachment into the wilderness and the trafficking of wildlife. Last Congress, we were able to develop bipartisan legislation to address the root causes of pandemics. And this year, we want to build on that effort and advance that legislation forward. In addition, we're encouraged by what we've seen from the administration so far. Last week, for instance, President Biden issued a national security directive regarding COVID-19. This directive calls out for a plan to be developed by the various agencies of the federal government, and it includes a prevention component. We believe, and will keep making the case to the administration, that conservation components, which are preventative when it comes to pandemics, should be fully considered for inclusion in this plan. On the issue of global diversity, we believe there's increasing recognition that we need to do more to address biodiversity loss. On the policy side, we start from a relatively good place, as we have been successful in increasing funding for key conservation programs over the last 4 years. This is an issue that still enjoys bipartisan support. So our goal here is more forward-leaning. We aim to continue this investment trend and are calling for the doubling of funding for these important programs. In addition, we will continue to encourage the Biden administration to become a strong international leader and aim for robust 2030 targets for biodiversity conservation. Finally, one particular idea we will be pushing is the concept that nature loss is actually a threat to US security and US economic interest. And for that, we have developed the Natural Security Campaign. This is a campaign that has commissioned a report that will release later this year to elevate and embed the national security concerns with the new administration, particularly among foreign policy, security, and intelligence agencies. We will continue our efforts to stop natural resources crime, specifically illegal wildlife, illegal timber, and illegal unregulated and unreported fish. The good news is that we have been effective in advancing the federal authorities to crack down on these types of crime. That is particularly true of the authorities we have now in place on illegal timber and illegal fishing. The key statute on wildlife trafficking needs to be reauthorized by this Congress, but we have a good bipartisan proposal and we hope we can improve it moving forward. That being said, on all these three items, illegal wildlife, illegal timber, and illegal unregulated and unreported fish, we're going to continue to push for smarter and more robust enforcement, which will require additional resources. Now, let me turn it over to my colleague, Rose Luttenberger, to walk us through our approach to climate. Rose?
Thanks, Alejandro. The new administration provides opportunity for us not only to defend our priorities, but to advance them. I'm going to talk a bit about how the new administration has the ability to make a big difference in terms of climate and Arctic policy, and how that will affect our work here at WWF. As Alejandro mentioned earlier, there's a pretty slim Democratic majority in the House and Senate. So as one can imagine, passing legislation can and will be somewhat challenging depending on the topic. While we primarily think about advancing our priorities by working with Congress to pass legislation, we also should remember that the administration has new tools in its pocket that do not require congressional action. The first tool is executive action. The Constitution gives the president a broad executive and enforcement authority to use his or her discretion to issue federal directives to manage the government. Once issued, executive orders remain in force until they are canceled, revoked, adjudicated unlawful, or expire on their terms. It is important to note that at any time, the president may revoke, modify, or make exceptions from any executive order, whether the order was made by the current president or their predecessor. We've already seen the Biden administration use this tool for climate action. On day one of the Biden presidency, the president signed an executive order to have the US rejoin the Paris Agreement and revoke the permit for the Keystone Pipeline. Additionally, just yesterday, the Biden administration took more executive action to tackle the climate crisis. Yesterday's executive order establishes that climate considerations are an essential element in US foreign policy and national security, establishes climate-focused task forces and working groups throughout the government, orders the Secretary of the Interior to pause on entering into new oil and gas leases on land and in offshore waters, and commits to conserving 30% of our lands and oceans by 2030. The second tool is the federal rulemaking process. Federal agencies can also create federal regulations to influence policy. There are many steps to the federal rulemaking progress, so it is not always the fastest tool, but it is an option. We have a real opportunity here, not only to work with Congress, but to work with the administration and key federal agencies to advance our priorities using these tools. In regards to climate policy, we can work with the EPA to create new rulemaking frameworks that implement US emission reduction goals. We can also work with the US Army Corps of Engineers and encourage that it craft new rules that require the Corps to prioritize nature-based solutions and green infrastructure over gray infrastructure where it is appropriate. Now, when it comes to Arctic policy, executive action can make all the difference, and I'll explain how. As you may know, the 2017 Tax Act, which Congress passed and signed into law, included language that directed Congress to open the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to oil and gas development. In the last weeks of the Trump administration, the Bureau of Land Management held a lease sale and awarded 3 leases. Now, just within the last week, on day one of the Biden presidency, the president signed an executive order that placed a temporary moratorium on oil and gas leasing activities in the refuge. Now, because of the 2017 Tax Act, we will need Congress for permanent protection, but this executive order alleviates the immediate threat. Another example is offshore drilling in the Arctic Ocean. Now, this story begins during President Obama's time in office. One of the last actions that the president took before he left office was using the 1953 Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act to protect the Arctic Ocean. Specifically, this legislation allows the president to put the ability to put large unleased sections of an ocean off limits for future oil and gas exploration. Using this bill, President Obama designated 125 million acres of the Beaufort and Chukchi Seas as off limits to future oil and gas development. Then, just months later, after President Trump took office, he used executive action to withdraw President Obama's protections for the Arctic Ocean, and he put these waters back on the table for consideration. Now, as you can imagine, these actions caused quite an uproar with both the environmental community and with local tribal nations, who subsequently sued. Back in March 2019, a federal judge in Alaska declared that President Trump's order was illegal and preserved the Obama-era protections. Again, with the new administration, we have an opportunity to elevate our Arctic priorities at the agency level. Whether this means implementing new rules and industry standards for large-scale shipping operations, or working with federal agencies to advance rules that protect marine mammals from underwater noise, there's a lot that we can do. So while administrative action can help us, we will need Congress for comprehensive climate legislation. Given the slim Democratic majority in both chambers of Congress, we know that we will have to work together in a bipartisan fashion to get things done. Now, this provides a real opportunity for us here at WWF to lead in this space. Between our work with our corporate partners, our involvement in sub-national coalitions, and our bipartisan relationships, we have a chance to really help drive these climate conversations. As you may know, WWF is a founding member of the Climate Leadership Council, which is a policy institute that works with businesses and environmental organizations to promote a carbon tax framework. For years, we've been working closely with CLC and together have engaged with members on Capitol Hill from both sides of the aisle. We have made real progress in this space, and we anticipate seeing a bipartisan carbon bill in the coming months. Now I'm going to pass this over to my colleague Anthony, who will take it from here.
Thanks, Rose. I'd like to speak for a moment on the way the WWF is working to combat the pollution of plastic and the pollution of materials leakage on our environment. The plastics and pollution issues are a bit new for WWF, and they build on a slightly different framework. We're leveraging the way that we've approached our private sector partners and our activists to understand ways in which WWF can influence the federal government and Congress to create change and preserve our natural resources and protect our environment. When working with our private sector partners, we've worked to understand how we can change the way that our economy functions and incentivizes the creation of waste over the creation and preservation of natural resources. By working with private sector partners, we've learned ways in which we need to change incentives for the extraction of oil and gas or the creation of virgin plastic, and how we can transition our economy to be more circular. That includes understanding the way our waste management system functions, understanding the decisions that businesses make that prioritize the creation of waste, and how we can alter these market signals to incentivize consumers, governments, and corporations to transform the way that we interact with materials. We've been leading thought partners with not only partners in the private sector, but partners in government, and understanding interventions on the policy level that can be enacted to make change. This includes and starts with an understanding of our infrastructure and how we can develop that infrastructure to enable consumers to recycle their waste. Currently, about 55% of the American public has access to waste management that includes recycling, while about 10% of the country has no access to waste management at all. By starting to understand the way we need to transform our infrastructure, we can get a better understanding of ways that we can reduce this burden on consumers and the federal and local and state governments that actually implement our waste management. Currently, our waste management system around the globe allows about 8 million metric tons of plastic to enter our oceans every year, which is about the equivalent of a garbage truck worth of plastic every minute. We've recognized that the current system has not been working for far too long, and we need to change the way that we're responsible for the waste we create. That's why WWF has been leading our conversations around the implementation of extended producer responsibility, or a better way to put that is implementing legislation that would put corporate dollars behind the investments needed to make change in the way that we process waste. Ultimately, we want to change the incentives in our marketplace to transition from incentivizing the use of virgin plastic to incentivizing the use of recycled content in the materials that we already have. We've led and endorsed legislation in the last Congress to combat marine debris at an international level, and we look forward to working to extend these commitments of the federal government to include a reevaluation of the way that we manage waste. Plastic reduction is our goal, and that begins with evaluating the way that we use materials in the same way that we evaluate our impact on our climate. The production of plastic relies on the use of oil and gas and the refinement of chemicals to create cheap, disposable material. We need to understand the impact that our current system has on our environment, not only in the way that our materials leak into nature, but in the way that our linear economy is having an impact on our climate. That includes moving toward a circular economy. We're looking at connecting corporate responsibility to consumer action and government investment. All of these market signals need to work together to ensure that each level of the system is receiving the right signal that would prioritize the creation of recycled content and the use of our existing materials above the use of cheap, polluting materials. We've developed national policy designed to incentivize recycling and ensure that those who pollute the system, ensure that those who create cheap, non-recyclable materials are incentivized to transition to materials and systems that would allow consumers to play an active role in the way that we manage our waste. Furthermore, in the new administration and with the new majorities in Congress supporting them, we hope to establish US leadership in the development of waste management capacities across the planet. We cannot continue to allow our waste to end up in other countries where it's unmanageable, but also to initiate the right global signals that the United States is ready to be a leader in cleaning up our planet and our oceans. Finally, we're working with the private sector to ensure that the investments and actions that we take are actually accountable, that we're making a difference in the 8 million metric tons of plastic that ends up in our ocean annually, and that everyone has a role to play and is responsible in their roles that they're playing to transform the way that we move from a linear disposable economy into a circular economy. We've been building on great success in the past year, and we're looking forward to building on great success in the new year. With that, I will turn it over to Alejandro.
Thank you, guys. So what's next? Bottom line, a lot of work, but at the same time, a lot of opportunity because of the more receptive administration on the executive side in Capitol Hill. On the first point here, we, as quickly after the House, as I assumed after, but quickly after President Biden was officially declared the winner of the election, our team engaged with the transition team, putting forward ideas for the consideration as they were standing up their government. Our goal is going to continue to keep doing that with them, whatever we can to discuss with them in private and support them in public or call them out in public as needed. The second point is continue to leverage our relationships and the goodwill in Capitol Hill to do both things, advance our priorities at the same time, compare notes and help the administration if the priorities that they have overlap with ours. Finally, something unique about WWF that we've been effective in leveraging in the past is the expertise that we have in particular areas because of our area-based programs and because of scientists. So we want to continue that process to help lawmakers on Capitol Hill, but also the administration as they stand up their government so that we can leverage our ideas into the power of the federal government. So with that, I'm excited to take on your questions and have a great conversation.
Thank you for sharing this important timely work, Alejandro, Rose, and Anthony. We're going to turn to the questions submitted via the Google form. We'll do our best to get to as many as we can. Are you guys ready?
Ready or not.
The first question is from Sarah. What do you think of Biden's cabinet nominees so far when it comes to WWF's issues?
I think it's been impressive. I think it's been impressive both for the caliber of people that he's brought, but also because there are plenty of people as part of the cabinet who wanted to return to public service. You can see it from the White House-based positions like Secretary Kerry's as envoy on climate, international envoy on climate, or Gina McCarthy, again, recognizing the needs of the country and the importance of public service. You can see the diversity in the, again, expertise with Tony Blinken at state. So overall, I think it's been incredible. I had the chance personally to work with them, some of them more closely than with others. During my Obama time, I was with President Obama for 8 years. And I saw them in private, being very thoughtful, deliberative, honest, and I saw them in public as we were engaging Capitol Hill to advance the president's priorities. So I'm very excited that they're there. I'm so thankful that they decided to hear the call of public service again. And we look forward to working with them and to be as helpful as we can whenever we can. I do know that they will be, as the president has said, guided by the science, guided by the facts, and because our views and our values and our programs are based on that, I think we, at a minimum, will get a fair hearing, and there's a good chance we can advance, the programs that we have.
Thanks, Alejandro. All right, question number 2, coming in from Catherine. This is a question WWF has been thinking a lot about. How does conservation help to prevent pandemics? You mentioned it, but can you explain that connection?
Sure. So what we have seen and our scientists been able to put together is essentially, if you look at the pandemics that have taken place in recent years, the bulk of them, if not all of them, including SARS and COVID, of course, originate with interaction between wildlife and humans. And what we've seen is that as we, as humans, encroach into the wilderness, they encounter wildlife, they encounter nature in a way they've not encountered before, and therefore they're exposed to new diseases. So the jump is, as we push ourselves into these wild areas, we expose our people are exposed to new viruses, and therefore, from our point of view, recognizing that as the connection point it's critical, because if we know that if we break into a space that otherwise we were not there before and we're going to encounter viruses, we need to be prepared. We make the case that is yet another reason why we should be more aggressive in conservation, why we should be more aggressive trying to prevent deforestation. We should adapt the way we grow our food, that we should crack down on the illegal traffic in the wildlife. Because even sometimes if we ourselves are not going into those wild spaces, some people are, they're taking wildlife, they're selling it, they're trading it, and therefore the exposure, and that's the linkage as we see it from the origin of the disease and the virus to in the connection to human beings. We don't think it's a coincidence, and I think that we have demonstrated in our scientists have reports basically where you can see the connection between areas where we've essentially neglected or abused nature and the jump from a virus to a human, and therefore we end up with what we have. Now, it is true that once that happens, we have to also, let's say that happens, and we have to be ready, right, to as a society, as a government, to say, once that's happened, we have to be able to detect it, we have to be ready to isolate it, we need to take measures so that it doesn't spread, which is what happened with COVID-19. But is the recognition that this is all linked to the origin of our abuse of nature, and that as challenging as it might be, we have to recognize how to crack down at the root cause of many of these pandemics.
Thank you. All right, another question coming up from Christy. To what extent, if any, does WWF coordinate its efforts with other major environmental organizations like Environmental Defense Fund, Natural Resources Defense Council, and the Nature Conservancy?
Yes, and yes, and yes. I mean, our goal is to look partners wherever we can find them. So we, some of those organizations listed, we partnered with, and many others. We try to find we do have the luxury that we cover a lot of space. So we cover international goals, we have some domestic goals, and some of these organizations are, play in the international space, some more domestically. So we try to find partners everywhere we can find them. And going back to the point I made earlier about engaging the transition team for the Biden administration, many of the priorities that we put forward were in coordination with fellow NGOs. Again, in the places where we either have to come to agreement on policy that we think is important, or that we are already there because we worked with them for many, many years. So our goal is always to be looking for partners, like I said, the not-for-profit sector, but as Anthony was noting and Rose was noting, the private sector too. Clearly, it it is key and it is important to create those partnerships. That's how we make ourselves more holistic when we're engaging the administration with Capitol Hill. If we come, as a former congressional staffer, I do remember that many times when people came to talk to me about their ideas, the impact that you have on that member, on that staffer, on that senator is a lot stronger if you can come in with a unified perspective, be it not-for-profit sector or private sector. So across the board on climate and on plastics and on pandemics and wherever we can, certainly in climate, we're gonna keep pushing for all the partnerships that we can get. So if you have any new ideas or particular groups, send us our way.
Okay, next question up from Irene. I heard that in the COVID stimulus bill that was passed in December, $35 billion was designated for climate-related policies. Do you know the specifics on what the $35 billion was for?
The strongest member of my team, Rose, may have a little more on that.
Sure, happy to jump in. Yes, so the COVID relief package that was passed just before the new year was the most substantial federal investment in green technology in decades. The $35 billion was split up between renewable energy measures. So whether that's research and development for solar, wind, and energy storage, there was funding for energy efficiency projects, and there was funding that went towards upgrades to the electrical grid. But we should also mention that that package did even more than just provide that funding. That package actually also included tax credit extensions, which is really important for our work. The package also empowered the EPA to cut the use of HFCs, which are chemicals used in air conditioners and refrigerators. These are really bad for our carbon emissions. And this package set a goal of reducing these HFCs by 85% over the next 15 years. Science is saying that this cut will, or is expected to save as much as ½ degree Celsius of warming by the end of the century. So this is a really, really, really big advancement. It was a really great provision to have included in the package. And then lastly, I will note that the package also reauthorized the EPA's program to curb emissions from diesel engines. So yeah, this package was a great investment into renewables, and it also provided some other types of goals that will really help us fight the climate crisis.
Great, thank you, Rose. We have a two-part question coming up on plastics. Michael asks, several countries have banned the use of plastic bags. Is this a realistic way to address the plastic pollution problem? And Taya asks whether it's right to focus our plastic pollution strategies heavily on developed countries.
Anthony?
Sure thing. I'll approach the first question on banning plastic bags first. It's our position, and we believe the way to approach our reliance on plastic waste first on an evaluation of what plastic is truly unnecessary and how can we remove that from our waste streams. Plastic bags could be unnecessary, are not recyclable, and very often end up in our environment. And so you have to think about what is the best way to remove these products, whether they be plastic bags, plastic films, or other items that we deem to be unnecessarily or easily transitionable to a more sustainable material or a more sustainable model. What would the best way to achieve those results be? When it comes to plastic bag bans, WWF is very careful to say, you can ban plastic bags and they will no longer end up in nature, but we can't ban a plastic bag and replace it with a paper bag that was using paper that was sourced from a deforested land. So while we need to make a real clear evaluation of what plastic are we using that is truly unnecessary, we also need to make it clear that the phase out or the removal of these materials from our plastic portfolio as consumers, some of that will evolve into being a ban or more likely a phase out of these materials in a way that's mandatorily required by the government. Some of it will be the assistance with the private sector to enable a sustainable transition, thinking about the role or the potential role of plastic sourced from plants to replace some of our traditional oil and gas or petroleum-based plastics. I hope that answers your question. It is certainly not a solution to our plastic waste crisis, but it is a part of the solution, and evaluating what is unnecessary is certainly a part of the solution as we move toward a circular economy. I like to say that, our economy is a line, we need to make it a circle, but in order to get to a circle, we need to make that circle a lot smaller. We need to reduce the amount of materials we're using. That's why the first step in those 3 R's is to reduce. And once we reduce our waste streams, we'll be able to better manage what's ending up in those waste streams. When it comes to international development assistance, or the way that we're approaching developed versus developing countries in waste management, almost every country leaks plastic into nature, whether they're developed or not developed. And the concern is at what rate, and how do we transition waste management streams to, instead of focusing on landfilling or incineration, focus on reuse and recycling. It's important to approach every economy and every space that plastic is used with the same amount of ambition and the same desire to reduce the amount of plastic that is ending up in nature. So it is both a focus, I believe, on developing an assistance with developing nations to manage their waste, but also a reevaluation of how developed economies have also developed into becoming linear economies as well. So I hope that also answers your question.
Thanks, Anthony. All right, question in from Jessica. As someone who believes that all roads lead to climate change, I'm encouraged by President Biden's connection between climate change and national security issues. How does this connection of climate and conservation to national security impact WWF's initiatives and your expectations of success?
So I will chime in, and maybe Rose, who has additional perspective to it. I think one of the most impressive things about the administration so far is, not surprisingly, the approach of an inclusion of all the levers of power of the federal government to adjust to the climate crisis. It is something that, the power of the federal government through all its agencies leverages, the programs that the agency does, and therefore you change society in the programs that you take. I think it is also true that in some spaces, the receptivity to the argument for climate is stronger when you're talking about in the national security, from the national security perspective. It is not just a priority for individuals who may be seen as more progressives, but it's or liberal. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But it is the national security lens is one that attracts a different set of people that we need in order to make a meaningful difference. So the directive and the directive from the president and the reflection of that direction as a vision to cover all these agencies, including the national security apparatus, is impressive and meaningful, because literally it means that all the strings that lead to the president, from the domestic agencies to the national security apparatus, are going to help him advance his priorities. I will say, as I did also work. My previous job with President Obama, the complex problems that the national security apparatus encounters also creates the ripple effect of the leveraging of strengths within agencies that you may not even think are related to climate. So by bringing somebody with the stature of Secretary Kerry and setting him up as a national security advisor for climate envoy, you're literally doubling the power that you have, because not only are we going to have the Secretary of State in the power of the agency or the intelligence agencies, again, in the national security space, but also this new principal who has standing around the world And in order to make meaningful change, that's what it'll take. The understanding by others that this individual, in this case, Secretary Kerry, is close to the president, and it's a priority for us. So I think it's been fantastic to see that in, not related necessarily to the national security space, but I'm just thinking, given direction to Treasury to look into how to tackle climate crisis, given direction to the Department of Labor, do the same. I think they will have a meaningful, significant change in our policy approach. So that's my take. I don't know, Rose. Again, not to put you on the spot, but do you have anything to add? I'm sure you'll say it better than I will. But feel free to add your piece.
Yeah, no, I mean, climate change is absolutely related to national security. It is a major threat to national security. For instance, with increased natural disasters, you have increased refugee flows, not just in the United States, but across the world. You have conflicts over natural resources, such as food and water. This is being felt across the entire world. I mean, we're feeling it here in the United States with the hurricanes in Puerto Rico. We're feeling it over in the East with the crazy tsunamis. I mean, this is really, really, really we've seen devastating effects from climate change and natural disasters. And, in turn, as we see coastal communities being disrupted, as we seeing infrastructure failing, we are seeing the cost rise. We're seeing the economy suffering. It's absolutely related, and climate change causes conflict for multiple reasons. So yeah, just to build on what Alejandro was saying, it is absolutely related. And that's actually one of our major priorities here at WWF is working, climate solutions into our national security agenda across the world and here in the United States.
Okay, team, we have time for one more round of questions. And these last pair of questions have to do with how people can help us make our case to the US government. Rada asks, what kind of opportunities do you see for us to help you advocate for and advance WWF's priorities with Congress or the administration? And relatedly, Jeff would like to know, what specific legislation will you and the team have WWF volunteers help advocate for during the upcoming virtual lobby day? Over to you.
Great, thank you. So I would say lobby day, in case it's not on your radar, or in case you want to block off March 9th, keep that in mind. We're gonna have a virtual lobby day. By that I mean, we're gonna invite many of our members and people who believe in the issues we believe in to go and meet with the members of Congress. And traditionally, it's an event that WWF hosts them physically, but because of the pandemic and because Congress is not taking meetings in person, we're going to do this virtually. And we've so far gotten a great reception from many. But if you want to participate, that's one very specific way to help. Again, lobby day. I mean, you would be, I don't know that you would be surprised, but it does make a huge difference to the staff or to the member when they hear directly from their constituents. So the impact of somebody making the case for nature-based solutions or for additional resources for illegal fishing, and these specific ideas that we have, and we will work with you as we get ready for lobby day. I think it's really meaningful because it does make a difference when you go knock on doors. So it's just like that, we have, and maybe, I don't know what the right way of doing it is, but we do have an activism team and we have an outreach team that we regularly are in touch with, to the extent that people are available and want to sign up. We do encourage our members to be active with members. In general, we try to give people some direction as to the things that are happening on Capitol Hill and or with the administration. I think we've been in the past very effective to, for instance, make the case again to our members and to individuals who sign up for alerts to basically, make the case of, there's this particular rule that is going to be impacting the Arctic, for instance, we would encourage you to comment or write a comment, and we'll give you the background. So that has a direct impact. The same thing goes for Capitol Hill. If the particular pieces of legislation that we see moving, or that where amount of people weighing in with the members of Congress as they are getting ready to take a vote for or against things, we again reach out to our activist network, and you can help us make the case. Certainly, like I said, the impact that people have directly with their elected officials is very meaningful. And again, it's a place where many times we do enjoy very strong bipartisan support. So we do have the luxury that we have members who support our efforts across the country. So if you want to become an activist for us, or just to get information as to what we do, and I think that's a fantastic way of doing it. Yeah, so that I think that's I don't know if Anthony or Rose have additional thoughts, but if not, sign up.
I would just say,
Right.
Come join us. It's so much fun. It's always a great time.
Thank you all for your questions. That will do it for us this afternoon. Thanks again to Alejandro, Rose, and Anthony for sharing your work with us. And thanks to everyone who carved out time to join us today for this installment of the Insider Series. As always, we will follow up with an email that includes a link to a recording of today's program, along with a survey about your experience. We really do want to adjust and improve future events where we can, so please be honest. We also hope you'll share the recording with your family and friends. Please mark your calendars for the next installment of the WWF Insider Series. On Thursday, February 11th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, Dechen Dorji and Stuart Chapman will talk about WWF's efforts to double the number of tigers in the wild by 2022. Please check your email inbox or wwfevents.org for information on future installments of the Insider Series. Thanks again for joining us and for your commitment to conservation and to WWF. See you next time.
Your passion and generosity are helping build a more resilient future for nature and people. And while we are all staying home and staying safe, your commitment is still helping to make conservation progress happen all over the world. From the U.S. Northern Great Plains to the Arctic, from the Eastern Himalayas to the savannas of Africa. Your commitment fuels work that safeguards local communities, iconic wildlife, and vast land and waterscapes. Together, we're developing innovative solutions to ensure the health of our planet.
Your support is helping to take us to a whole new level in our work.
Support that people like you have provided has achieved so much.
Thank you for your generous support.
Thank you so much for your support.
Thank you for your support.
We can't do the work that we do alone.
We're doing all of this great work at WWF. We have all of these amazing supporters out there. And it is really nice to be able to connect with the people that enable us to do this work.